So thank you. I'm very honored to be here at this meeting of the RT of Video Launch. I'm grateful for the invitation. Today I'm going to talk about my book, Forbidden Archaeology, which is about evidence for extreme human antiquity. Work in archaeology is inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, especially the Puranas, or the histories. Now, today, many scientists try to keep spirituality and science completely separate, but I've managed to integrate my spiritual perspectives with my work in archaeology and the history of archaeology. And I have been invited to speak about these ideas at some of the leading scientific institutions in the world, like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow, and the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and many other universities and scientific institutions. So many people are interested to see how one can integrate Vedic spirituality with scientific work. The question I'm dealing with today is, how old is the human species? Today, the most common answer to that question comes from the modern followers of Charles Darwin. And they say the first humans like us appeared on Earth less than 200,000 years ago. They say before that time, there were no humans like us. There were only more primitive, ape-like human ancestors. But the Puranas, the historical writings of ancient India, tell a different story. Now, to understand this story, we have to understand something about the Puranic concept of time. The Puranic concept of time is cyclical. The basic unit of that cyclical time is the kalpa, or the day of Brahma, and it lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. A kalpa, or day of Brahma, is divided into subcycles called manvatars, each lasting about 300 million years. There are 14 manvatars in a kalpa. Today, according to the Puranic calendar, we are in the 7th, or Vaivasvata manvatar period. This text from the Bhagavad Purana, or Srimad Bhagavatam, tells us something very interesting, especially the first two lines. Deva Sura Rinam Sargo Naganam Mrigapakshinam Samasikas Tvayam Prokto Yes to Swayam Uve Tere. The demigods, demons, human beings, nagas, beasts, and birds were created during the reign of Swayambhuva Manu. So the Swayambhuva Manvatar is the first Manvatar in the Kalpa, or the day of Brahma. And the Bhagavad Purana is saying human beings were present at that time. And the Swayambhuva Manvatar goes back between 1.7 and 2 billion years ago. And according to the Puranas, humans have been present on Earth since that time, all the way to the present day, the 7th Manvatar. So, sometimes I speak about these things at scientific conferences, meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, meetings of the European Association of Archaeologists. And in a scientific meeting like that, I cannot give a statement from the Puranas as evidence. Now, if I were in India speaking with some rishis who accepted the Puranas as evidence, I could give a statement from the Puranas as evidence. But in a scientific setting, I can't do that. But I can do this. I can make a prediction. If what the Puranas say about human antiquity is true, then there should be reports of archaeological evidence for humans existing much further back in time than 200,000 years ago, perhaps going back many millions of years. So, what was my method for testing this prediction? My method was to examine all archaeological reports from the time of Darwin to the present, and not just in the English language. I have a reading knowledge of German, French, Spanish, and most of the major European languages. So I looked at reports in all of these different languages, and that research effort took about 8 years. And I had 2 principal findings as a result of that research. Now, I divide the scientific literature into 2 parts: the primary scientific literature and the secondary scientific literature. The primary scientific literature is reports by scientists like archaeologists and geologists published in their peer-reviewed scientific professional publications. The secondary literature is based on the primary literature. It includes things like textbooks, survey studies, and things of that sort. So my first finding is perhaps not very surprising. There are no reports of evidence for extreme human antiquity in the current secondary literature, textbooks. But my second finding is a little more interesting. There are many reports of evidence for extreme human antiquity in the primary scientific literature, past and present. And by that I mean reports of human bones, human footprints, and human artifacts being found in situations much older than 200,000 years. So I collected those reports in this book, Forbidden Archaeology, which is about 900 pages long. So then a question arises. If this evidence is there in the primary scientific literature, then why don't we find it in today's secondary literature, textbooks? I believe it's because of what I call a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. We can call the little blue box the knowledge filter. What it represents is the dominant consensus in a scientific discipline about a question. So reports of evidence that conform to the dominant consensus will pass through this knowledge filter very easily, which means we will read about it in today's textbooks. But if we have reports of evidence that radically contradict the dominant consensus, they will be filtered out, which means we don't hear very much about them. Now, I'm going to give some examples of the kinds of evidence that I'm talking about. And some of the cases are going to be from the more recent history of archaeology and some from the early 20th century and the 19th century. Some of the cases are going to involve discoveries that are relatively close to what today's scientists are prepared to accept. In some of the cases I'm going to discuss depart radically from what today's scientists are prepared to accept. This is Virginia Steen McIntyre. She's an American geologist who I know personally. She was involved in some archaeological discoveries that were made at a place called Huayatlaco in Mexico, near the town of Puebla. There, a team of Mexican and American archaeologists discovered human artifacts like these. It was a very professional excavation. The artifacts were photographed in the layers of rock in which they were found. And the archaeologists wanted to know how old these things were. So they called a team of geologists to date the site. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues used 4 methods to date the site. I'll mention a couple of them. In the same layers with the stone tools, animal bones with cut marks on them were found. The geologists used the uranium series method to date those bones. They got an age of 245,000 years. Above the layer with the stone tools was a layer of volcanic ash. The geologists used the zircon fission track method to date that layer of ash. They got an age of 270,000 years. Using all 4 methods that they employed, the geologists concluded the site must be at least 250,000 years old. But the archaeologists refused to accept that date. They said human beings capable of making the artifacts did not exist 250,000 years ago. They had not evolved yet according to their ideas. And what to speak of being found in North America, the current scientific consensus is there were no human beings in North America until 25,000 years ago. So the archaeologists refused to publish the age for the site given by their own hand-picked team of geologists. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues were upset by that. So they decided to independently publish the age for the site. In this scientific journal. But when they did that, they experienced an extreme negative backlash from their colleagues in the scientific world, who were very angry that they had published something that contradicted the dominant consensus on human antiquity in North America. Virginia Steve McIntyre later wrote, "Not being an anthropologist, I didn't realize how deeply woven into our thought the current theory of human evolution has become. Our work at Wyatt Locko has been rejected by most archaeologists because it contradicts that theory, period." So this shows how this knowledge filtering process operates. A dominant theory can influence how scientists react to different categories of evidence that come to their attention. Now I'm going to go back to a case from the earlier history of archaeology. This is Jacques Boucher de Perre, who was from France. He was one of the fathers of modern scientific archaeology. At a place called Moulin-Quignon in the town of Abbeville in northeastern France, he found an anatomically modern human jaw. He found it in the bottom layer of his excavation, the bottom of layer 5 there, and he found along with it many stone tools and weapons. Now, according to modern geologists, that layer at Moulin-Quignon is about 430,000 years old. So it was quite a controversial discovery. At the time the discovery was made, many scientists could not accept that humans existed so far in the past. So they proposed a story. They said, here's what probably happened. Someone went to a Roman cemetery and took a jawbone, maybe 2,000 years old, and then planted it in the excavation for Jacques Boucher de Perre to find. So that is the account of this discovery that we read in the textbooks today. But here's something we don't read in today's textbooks. Jacques Boucher de Perre was very concerned by these reports that he had been the victim of a hoax. So he made additional excavations in the same locations that were witnessed by other professional scientists. These new excavations were carried out under conditions that completely ruled out the possibility of any kind of hoax. And these new excavations, Jacques Boucher de Perre uncovered 100 additional anatomically modern human bones and teeth. So I think what we have here is evidence that humans like us were existing 430,000 years ago in Northern Europe. Just 2 years ago, an interesting discovery was made at a place called Happisburg in the United Kingdom. Dozens of footprints were found there, and deposits between 780,000 years and 1 million years old. The archaeologists very carefully studied the footprints, and they calculated what's called the foot index. And you take the width of the foot divided by the length of the foot and multiply by 100, and that gives you the foot index. And the average for the 152 Happisburg prints that were suitable for measurement was 39, which is roughly the same as averages for samples of the foot index for humans living today, such as North American Indians and Eskimos. So the footprints were exactly like modern human footprints, but they couldn't accept that they were made by humans like us because, according to their theories, humans like us did not exist at that time. Of course, according to the Puranas, the historical writings of ancient India, people were existing at that time. Many people have heard of Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania in East Africa. Many important discoveries have been made there, but most people are not aware of the first discovery that was made at Olduvai Gorge. In 1913, the German scientist Hans Reck announced the discovery of a fairly complete, anatomically modern human skeleton. This is the skull from the skeleton. The skeleton was found in upper bed 2 of Olduvai Gorge, and bed 2 is between 1.15 and 1.7 million years old. Reck said the skeleton was solidly embedded in upper bed 2. He had to use a hammer and chisel to take the bone out of the rock. So it was a very controversial discovery, and there were decades of debate about it during the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. Many scientists thought the debate was settled in the 1960s when a German scientist named Rainer Proch did a radiocarbon date on the bone, a bone from the skeleton, and he said it was less than 10,000 years. So many people thought, okay, this settles it. You don't have a skeleton of a human being over 1 million years old. You have a skeleton of a human being only 10,000 years old or less. But there are some problems with that date. First problem is, where did he get the bone to use for his radiocarbon dating? During World War II, the skeleton was lost. The museum it was in was bombed. So nevertheless, he said somehow or other he found in a museum some box of bones that contained a fragment of bone from the original skeleton. But there's another problem also, and that was that Rainer Proch was forced to resign his position as a professor of anthropology at Frankfurt University after an academic court there found him guilty of falsifying dozens of radiocarbon dates during his long career. So I'm not sure that a radiocarbon date on a piece of bone that may not have been from the original skeleton carried out by a professor who was guilty of falsifying dozens of radiocarbon dates settles the issue. I think the best evidence for the age of Reck's skeleton remains the report of the original investigator who said he found it solidly embedded in upper bed 2 of Olduvai Gorge. Now this is an interesting little case that came to my attention just this year. The photographs that you see here are 4 different views of a finger bone that was discovered at Olduvai Gorge. This report was published in Nature Communications earlier this year. The investigators determined that this finger bone is exactly like an anatomically modern human finger bone, yet it was found in deposits 1.84 million years old. Now, you may wonder which finger bone it was. Technically, it's called the left fifth proximal manual phalanx. So, if you look at your left hand and at your small finger, you'll see there are 3 bones there. So the proximal phalanx or bone is this one here. And the scientists determined it was exactly like that of a modern human being. They did very detailed measurements of this bone and compared the measurements to the bones of monkeys, baboons, gorillas, chimpanzees, and human beings. And you can see that the OH86 finger bone, that's the technical name of this piece of bone, it comes in the middle of the blue box, which is the box representing anatomically modern humans. So, just to show you how this knowledge filtering process operates, in their scientific report, the authors said OH86 represents a hominin species whose closest form affinities are to modern Homo sapiens. However, the geological age of OH86 obviously precludes its assignment to Homo sapiens. So this is how this knowledge filtering process operates. They admit it's exactly like the finger bone of a modern human being, and therefore the normal thing would be to attribute it to Homo sapiens. But because of the geological age of 1.84 million years, then obviously you can't do that. So this is a very recent example of how this knowledge filtering process operates in archaeology even today. I would say the OH86 finger bone should be assigned to Homo sapiens and be given an age of 1.84 million years. And that would be consistent with the accounts of human antiquity that we find in the Puranas and the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which talk about human beings existing in previous yugas, previous manvantars. In the beginning of the 20th century, an interesting discovery was made in Buenos Aires, Argentina. An anatomically modern human skull cap was found there in an excavation. The excavators had gone down 45 feet. At that level, they encountered a thick layer of limestone rock, which was called in Spanish, tosca, means hard. And when they broke through that layer of limestone, they found the anatomically modern human skull cap in the Pre-Ensenada Formation, which according to modern geologists is between 2.15 and 3.2 million years ago. This discovery was announced to the scientific world and the primary scientific literature by the Argentine scientist Florentino Ameghino. Also in the 19th century in England, an interesting report was published in Anthropological Review in the year 1867. Dr. Robert Collier announced the discovery of an anatomically modern human jaw. It was found 16 feet deep in the Red Crag Formation at a place called Foxhall in England. Foxhall is near the town of Ipswich in eastern England. According to modern geologists, the Red Crag Formation is between 2 and 3 million years old. Now this is another case from the early 20th century that recently came to my attention. In 1921, the anthropologist Dr. Vignati, announced the discovery at Miramar, Argentina, of 2 molar teeth embedded in a small fragment of mandible or lower jaw. The scientist who studied these molars and the fragment of jaw said, such as Dr. Joaquin Fringeli, our attention was particularly drawn to the completely human character of the molars. Later, an American anthropologist who studied the teeth, Theodore D. McCown, said, the Miramar molars are, quote, quite positively Homo sapiens. The molars were discovered in some seaside cliffs near Miramar, Argentina. It's a photograph of the site. Now this chocolate formation in which these molars were found is between 3.2 million and 4 million years old, according to modern geologists. So there we have evidence for a human presence between 3 and 4 million years ago in Argentina. In 1979, Mary Leakey announced the discovery of footprints at a place called Laetoli in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. In her original report, published in National Geographic magazine, Mary Leakey said, the Laetoli footprints are indistinguishable from modern human footprints. Other scientists also agreed. Paleontologist Tim White said, make no mistake about it, they're like modern human footprints. Now, neither Mary Leakey nor Tim White believe that humans like us made those footprints. They are evolutionists. They don't believe humans like us were existing at the time the footprints were made. The footprints were found in layers of solidified volcanic ash that were dated using the potassium argon method as being 3,700,000 years old. So they thought humans like us weren't present at that time. They cannot have made those footprints. So they proposed there must have been some kind of ape man who had feet just like modern human feet. Now, up to the present moment, no one has discovered the skeleton of any ape man that old, 3,700,000 years old, that has feet exactly like modern human feet. Actually, the only creatures that have feet exactly like modern human feet are human beings like ourselves. So, what did Mary Leakey actually find? I think we have to consider the possibility that she found evidence that humans like us were existing almost 4 million years ago. Now, someone might say, okay, footprints are a little bit ambiguous. It would be better if you had human skeletons 4 million years old, and such things have been reported in the primary scientific literature. For example, the Italian geologist Giuseppe Ragazzoni reported finding human skeletons in layers of rock 4 million years old at a place called Castanedolo in northern Italy. I went to that village of Castanedolo and I met this gentleman there, and he gave me a copy of a very rare geological report about these discoveries. And from the information in the report, we were able to locate the place where the discoveries were made. Now, when some scientists hear that a human skeleton has been found in layers of rock 4 million years old, they will say, this is very easy to explain. The skeleton could not possibly be 4 million years old. Maybe 4,000 years ago, somebody died on the surface, and then his relatives dug a grave, and they put the skeleton down into that ancient layer of rock, and that is why you think you have found a human skeleton 4 million years old. Now, things like this can happen. They do happen. Technically, it's called intrusive burial. But Ragazzoni, the discoverer, was a professional geologist, and he was very much aware of this problem. And he said, if it had been a burial, then all the layers of rock above the skeleton would have been disturbed, as we see here. But he said he looked very carefully when he was taking the skeletons out of the ground, and he could see that all the layers above them were intact and undisturbed, which indicates that the skeletons are as old as the layers of rock in which they were found, in this case, 4 million years. This is the Portuguese geologist, Carlos Ribeiro. In the late 19th century, he discovered hundreds of stone artifacts in his country of Portugal. He found them in layers of rock 20 million years old. And as a professional geologist, he said they cannot have come into those layers from any higher, more recent level. He displayed the artifacts in these cases in the Museum of Geology in Lisbon. But if you go to the museum today, you will not see them on display anymore. They're kept locked in the cabinets that you see behind me there. But I got permission from the directors of the museum to open up those cabinets, and I was able to study and photograph some of these 20 million year old human artifacts from Portugal, and these are some of them. I also went to the museum archives and I carefully studied Dr. Ribeiro's original maps and field notes, and then I went into the countryside of Portugal and I relocated some of the places where he made his discoveries. For example, this is the quarry or mine at Organyeira, where he found human artifacts and layers of rock 20 million years old, including this one, this pointed artifact made from flint. His original label is still on it. It's interesting what happened. When Ribeiro was alive, he displayed the artifacts in the Museum of Geology in Lisbon with labels showing an age of 20 million years. After he died, his colleagues did something interesting. They left the artifacts on display, but they wrote new labels for them, giving them far younger ages. For example, this is the new label they wrote for the artifact I just showed you. The second line, written line, gives the age. It says Paleolítico Superior in Portuguese, and that means Upper Paleolithic period. And according to archaeologists, that period in Europe goes back about 20,000 years. So Ribeiro's colleagues thought 20 million years, that's impossible. Humans cannot have existed at that time. 20,000 years, that sounds okay. So they wrote new labels for all the artifacts. And then the next generation of officials in the museum just put the entire collection away, including the new labels. And I'm the first researcher in 50 years to see these things. I presented a paper about these discoveries at a meeting of the European Association of Archaeologists that was held in Lisbon, Portugal in the year 2000. I thought that would be a good time and place to talk about these things. And some Portuguese archaeologists became very interested in my paper, and they later decided to publish it in the peer-reviewed scientific journal of Iberian Archaeology, which is a scientific journal that deals with the archaeology of Spain and Portugal. So sometimes people ask me, do I have peer-reviewed scientific publications? And the answer is yes. Now, one case that's always fascinated me is the California gold mine discoveries. In the 19th century, gold was discovered in California. To get the gold, miners dug tunnels into the sides of mountains like Table Mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Sonora. And deep inside these tunnels, the miners found human bones and human artifacts. For example, they found many of these stone mortars and pestles. We may ask what the ancient people were doing with these things. Maybe they were making some garam masala or something. Now, what makes these discoveries so interesting to me is that the human artifacts and human bones were found in layers of solid rock that belong to the early part of the geological period called the Eocene, which means they would be about 50 million years old. These discoveries were reported to the scientific world by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. His report was published by Harvard University in the year 1879, but we don't hear very much about these discoveries today because of the process of knowledge filtration. This is the scientist most responsible for the knowledge filtering in this particular case, William Holmes, an anthropologist working at the Smithsonian Institution, and he wrote, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he wouldn't have published that report. In other words, he should have known that those discoveries could not possibly be true because human beings did not exist 50 million years ago. They hadn't evolved yet. So, according to Holmes, the discoveries should be forgotten. And that's what happened. However, some of the artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. And they're not shown to the public. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum. but I got permission from the directors of the museum to see them, and those are some of the artifacts from the California gold mines. I also went into the mountains of California. This is Table Mountain as it looks today. And we were able to find some of the old 19th century gold mining tunnels where these things were originally discovered. I presented a paper about the California gold mine discoveries at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress that was held in Washington in 2003. So how far back in time can we go with evidence like this? In the year 1862, a scientific journal called The Geologist published an interesting report. A human skeleton was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois in the United States. Directly above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock, which was unbroken. That kind of rules out the intrusive burial idea. According to modern geologists, the layer in which the skeleton was found is about 300 million years old. This interesting report from Scientific American tells of a beautiful metallic base that was found 15 feet deep in solid rock in Dorchester, Massachusetts. According to modern geologists of the United States Geological Survey, the age of the formation at that place at that depth is about 600 million years. Now I could keep you here for many days going through one case after another because there are hundreds of these cases for archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make some concluding remarks. The significance of this evidence is that it contradicts the now dominant theory of human origins. And this was recognized by one of the architects of the now dominant theory, Professor William Howells. In 1993, when my book Forbidden Archaeology was first published, he got a copy of it and he read it and he wrote me a letter. And in that letter he said, quote, "Forbidden archaeology represents much careful effort in critically assembling published materials. Most of us," he's saying, in the world of science, "mistakenly or not, see human evolution with man emerging rather late. To have modern human beings appearing a great deal earlier would be devastating to the whole theory of evolution." So that's the significance of this evidence. It's devastating to the whole theory of human evolution. Another archaeologist wrote in a published review of Forbidden Archaeology in British Journal for History of Science. The archaeologist who wrote the review was Tim Murray, and he said, "Forbidden archaeology, quote, provides the historian of archaeology with a useful compendium of case studies in the history and sociology of scientific knowledge, which can be used to foster debate within archaeology about how to describe the epistemology of one's discipline." And that was the intention in writing that book, to provoke debate in archaeology about the epistemology of the discipline. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that deals with how do we know things? What is valid evidence? So we actually wanted to provoke a discussion like that, and this is a sign that we were successful. Now, he also wrote in that review, "Forbidden archaeology is designed to demolish the case for biological and cultural evolution and to advance the cause of a Vedic alternative." Now, it's at this point that many in the world of science become concerned, and when they see Vedic alternatives, because they think you cannot mix any kind of insights that come from the Vedas or the Bible or the Quran or any other religious or spiritual text in scientific work. It's a very prominent idea, but it's interesting what he said after this. He said, the quote, dominant paradigm has changed and is changing, and practitioners openly debate issues which go right to the conceptual core of the discipline. Whether the Vedas have a role to play in this is up to the individual scientist concerned. And this is a position that I can support absolutely. No ban on the Vedas, but it's up to the individual scientists whether or not they want to introduce some Vedic perspective to their scientific work. And of course, I've chosen to do that. And my books are now published in 26 languages. One of the languages is Russian. And I've been invited to Russia several times. I've spoken at universities all across the country, from Vladivostok to Moscow to St. Petersburg. And usually the lectures go without any problem. But in one case, there was a problem. Some professors had invited me to speak about forbidden archaeology at the Tumen State University in Russia. And a lecture was scheduled, but then other professors at the university objected that I was being allowed to speak there. So they went to the rector, or the president of the university, and they put pressure on him to cancel the lecture, and he did. So the professors who invited me tried to get the rector to change his mind, but he wouldn't. The pressure from the other side was too great. So then the professors who invited me went to the director of the local branch of the Russian Academy of Science. And he said, okay, if they won't let him speak at the university, he can speak here at the Russian Academy of Science. So they had buses bring students and professors from the university to the Russian Academy of Science building. And the professors who invited me said, more people came than would have come if the lecture had been held at the university. Because everybody was wondering, what is this man going to say that's so dangerous that his lecture was canceled? Now, something interesting happened. The next year, I came back to the same university and I lectured in the biology department there, no problem. I guess the administration decided better just let him talk and let the students make up their own minds about it. If we try to stop him, it will just be worse. Now, things like this happen in the United States too. Last year, I was invited to speak at Google headquarters in Mountain View. Google has a nice program whereby employees can invite authors to come and speak at Google headquarters. So one of the employees there of Indian heritage invited me to speak at Google headquarters, and a lecture was scheduled. So when some other employees found out, they tried to get the lecture canceled. They weren't successful. I did give the lecture, as you can see. But if this didn't happen, this kind of thing didn't happen once or twice a year, I couldn't really call my topic forbidden archaeology. So there really are attempts to forbid this kind of knowledge. So I want to thank you for your kind attention. This is my personal website at cremo.com. Find there information about my various books, which we have some copies back here. Forbidden Archaeology is the book that I'm speaking about tonight. The Hidden History of the Human Race is an abridged version of that same book. It's 300 pages instead of 900. The Forbidden Archaeologist is made in columns that I write for a magazine called Atlantis Rising. Human Devolution presents a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. People ask, okay, you have so much evidence that contradicts the current theory of human origins. What are you going to present in its place as an alternative? So that book, Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, is there. Then my most recent published book is called My Science, My Religion. And it's a collection of 24 papers that I've presented at mainstream scientific conferences, integrating my Vedic spirituality with my scientific work in human origins and antiquity. And here's some more contact information. So again, thank you for the invitation to address you today. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.